everybody, and welcome back to another very exciting book related video here on my channel. In today's video, in theory, I wanted to do my top 24 books of 2024. As of today, I've only read 36 books this year. So trying to find 24 actual books that I enjoyed and I wanted to put in this video was quite hard. I think I had about 15 or 18 when I went from 5 stars to 4 stars, and then I had to start going into the 3 stars, and I think I got to 20 or so, and then we would have had to start pulling books from 2 stars. And I was not very happy about that. So instead of my top 24 books of 2024, I'm gonna actually change it to my top 15 books of 2024. That way I get all of my 5 stars, all of my 4.5 stars, and a few or majority of my 4 stars. The ones that pretty much truly mattered. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into this video. Together, I'm gonna put these books, this is number 15 that I'm gonna show you first, it's blue, and then number 14, it's purple. But they are in a series. There's another one in this list. I'm so sorry. Like I said, I only had so many books to choose from. Technically, in the 15th spot, I have Beautiful Darkness. This is book 2 in the Beautiful Creature series. I really enjoyed this. It just wasn't the first book in the series, so I didn't enjoy it as much as the first book. But in number 14 position, we do have Beautiful Creatures, which is book 1 of the series. The series is a YA fantasy, and it has like a subplot of romance to a point in it, or like YA romance. And it follows technically a boy and a girl from this town, or I guess they have families. Both of them have families, and there's a magical element to it, and there's only 4 books in the series. They're very chunky-ish, like 600 to 800 pages each book, and I don't know, there's a little bit of adventure. Each book has its own problem and solution for the most part. Some of the problems trickle into the next book, and they continue throughout the series. I really enjoyed this. It was one of those that I happened to stumble across the first 3 books for free at the Airman's Attic in Las Vegas when we were stationed out there at Nellis, and I picked them up, and I didn't find the last one until I think right before we moved or so. I ended up going to a thrift store or a used bookstore and finding the 4th one. So I completed the series, and I never seen anything about it, but I guess the series was popular from time to time, and also at the same time, I guess it was overhyped, some people said, but I actually enjoyed it, and I rated both of these 4 stars. And number 13, I have The Housemaid. This is by Freida McFadden. I'm sure you already know what this book is. This is book 1 in her, I think right now it's a trilogy, but I think she's adding on to it potentially. There's a few books in the series, and I actually enjoyed this. It wasn't necessarily my top mystery thriller type book, but I really enjoyed it. I like the concept of it. It was a great introduction to her books, but at the same time, I will not be reading the rest in the series. I've heard way too many bad things about how it's pretty much like the first book, and each book progressively gets worse. So I will just be sticking with The Housemaid, keeping Freida McFadden in good nature in my head, and I really enjoyed it. At number 12, I have the longest book I read this year, which is The Stand by Stephen King. This is also, in a way, when I did my end of the year book tag, I also put this book as my most disappointing book because it is 1153 pages, and I was hoping it was going to be a 5 star. It was just a 4 star. I enjoyed it a lot. I did listen to a lot of it here on YouTube for free by Books by English. Check their channel out if you have not, or if you're curious about listening to this book. I listened to probably about half or more at the gym. I had a really good time listening to it. It was very good. It's a really good story about adventure. Stephen King, I feel like, does really great with his stories. There are some very descriptive bad parts because Stephen King is just a very weird, I don't want to say certain words on my channel, but basically he lets his imagination flow with not just girls, but with guys sometimes. And yeah, sometimes it's just not necessary. I've heard things about it. Apparently in that book, they're like 14-year-old kids who do stuff. Like, there's just some things that Stephen King does that is just weird, creepy, unnecessary, descriptive. I don't know. You could list so many words and they'd probably fit him. But at the same time, he is very great with horror and very great with more of these thrillers and mysteries even. And he's written some other type books that are really good, like fantasy and sci-fi. He is a very good author. He uses really good words for the most part. He's also really bad and vulgar when it comes to language, not just descriptions. But I mean, it was like the 70s and the 80s. So you give in your take. I think this book in particular, originally this was a 78, and then this version that I have, which is really re-illustrated in a way, is from the 90s. I actually don't mind it. I definitely think it's one that I'm glad I tackled. It was a great achievement to read this and tackle it. I think that's one reason I might have rated it 4 stars. I did love the overall adventure, and I liked how in the beginning I kind of hated it. We had so many POVs, so many, like probably close to 20. But then as we got along, a lot of people died, a lot of things happened to other people, and we went down to, I would would say probably 6 main POVs, which is so much better. It was so much easier to keep track, and I was actually interested in a lot of their POVs, and I was very intrigued when things would happen, how they would either escape or get help. It would be resolved, to say the least. So I'm very thankful I read this. I'm very glad I tackled it, finally got it off my TBR, but that's as far as that will go with this book, pretty much. I will list it on here because it needs its own moment, since it is such a great accomplishment in my mind. I achieved, like, personal accomplishment. Then at number 11, I have Archer's Voice. I just finished this today. This is of course another 4-star. All of these so far have been 4-star. I actually really enjoyed this. I did, for the first time ever, pretty much, besides the Bible, because that's the only thing I actually annotate or try to. I highlighted, I did dog ear because I didn't want to put tabs in this. So I highlighted a few things that in the moment made me either think of things. A lot of things are basically thoughts about my husband, like his hands and his smile, things like that. And then some other things are some more like PTSD stuff related. Give or take some happy quotes, some sad quotes, but I actually really enjoyed this book. Minus, I'd say, like the whole middle. I've actually really enjoyed the whole middle when it came to plot and the actual story, and I'm coming out with a 24-hour reading challenge, so that will probably be out after this video, but I talked about how it's too descriptive for me. I'm very much more of a YA romance person, or YA in general when it comes to describing. It's more vulgar, I guess you could say, but it's certain things that I just didn't think it was going to be. I knew it was a romance. I knew it was a love story. I knew people highly loved this book and rated it so much, but at the same time, I didn't think it was going to go in detail as much as it did. Overall, I did enjoy it. Would I have wanted less details in a way? Yes. Even if I wasn't a Christian? Yes. But the fact that some of it I didn't see coming, some of it obviously I did. It just was out of nowhere progressively. In the middle was like every single chapter, whereas in the beginning it was one chapter and skipped multiple chapters. Towards the end, it was one chapter, skipped multiple chapters. I don't know what it was about that middle part, but everything was just going crazy in that section. But overall, I really liked the story. I liked the puzzle pieces that clicked. I liked a lot of things about this book. I would recommend it with like a little hearsay about, depending on if you like romance or not, if you're used to reading romance books or not. I guess that's the difference, is I typically don't read them that much. I'm more of a fantasy person, and if I have a romantasy, it's like maybe 1 or 2 things happen max, and that's in the entire book. I definitely think that it's still a good recommendation, like everybody has been recommending for the last couple of years, but it was not a 5-star read for me. It fell flat just a little bit. Now we're getting into the top 10 books. At number 10, I have Finale. I really enjoyed the entire trilogy of Caraval. This was my lowest rating at 4 stars, but it was a great conclusion. I really enjoyed how it was both Scarlet and Dana's point of view. We switched back and forth. I liked the characters. I liked how we came to a conclusion. I liked the whole entire game of Caraval in general throughout each and every book, but this one in particular was a little bit more, I guess, exciting in a way, because you already had details from the first 2 books, and so you were trying to figure them out. I felt like some things were very easy for me to call before they would happen, so I wasn't as surprised in this book, especially after reading the first 2, but overall I still really enjoyed it, really loved the world. 4 stars. At number 9, you already know I had to put either one book or potentially all of the books on this list. So at number 9, we have Star Climber. This is the 3rd and final book in the Matt Kruse trilogy, and actually I rated this book 4.5 stars. This was my second 4.5 of the year. I absolutely love this book. It was so different than going to space in this book. There was, of course, one person who kind of came around towards the end before something happened to him, and I'm not gonna lie, I was not expecting it. It kind of broke my heart a little bit. Overall, I love the conflict. I love how Kenneth Oppel wrote this series. Now, the female main character in book 2, she started to annoy me. Book 3, I had a little flippy flop where I wasn't sure if I really wanted to enjoy her, but then at the last couple pages I felt like she came around a lot more. Matt Kruse, obviously, Matt Kruse can do no wrong. He's a very good, for the most part. He had his moments too in this book, not so much in the other books, but in this book he had just a little too much jealousy, but not overpowering, if that makes sense, because it is YA sci-fi and there's a touch of romance between 2 characters. But overall, I really enjoyed the series. I love the covers. I think this cover in particular is really cool because we didn't get illustrations in the beginning like the other 2 books. So this is what I was referencing when I was reading about the Star Climber. I had to keep looking back on this image to see exactly like the spidery arms that connected to the cable that shot through the entire ship. And I don't know, this adventure was so cool, and In a way, I wish it didn't end in a trilogy, but I think it was a great conclusion, and I'm kind of glad that it was only 3 books, and this is the perfect addition for my shelf. My last 4.5-star read was actually Legendary. This is book 2 in the Caraval trilogy. I'm sure you all know. I love this book so much more than Caraval. I didn't rate it as high as Caraval, but I ended up loving it more. I love the cover more. I just love the characters. This book was one of those books that came around for me and kind of surprised me a little bit. It was like an underdog, I guess you could say. In the beginning, we switched POVs where we weren't following the first sister, the main sister, Scarlet. From the first book, we switched over to her sister, Dana, or Donatella. I think her name was Donatella, actually. And we were following her, and in the beginning, I could not care about her character. I just didn't want to listen to her. I just didn't want to learn about her. I didn't want to follow her character. I only wanted to follow Scarlet and the other male main character from the first book. And then as we were going on, I was like, okay, she's not that bad of a character. I really like the male main character that was introduced that I figured would be her romance person or her subplot of romance character. But at the same time, I was kind of like, okay, I could kind of still go back to Scarlet. And then the farther I got into this book, I was like, no, let's not go back to Scarlet. I don't even care. She is not my favorite sister anymore. I like her because also Scarlet was doing some really bad things that I didn't agree with. And I liked Donatella a little bit more. And I loved the romance so much more in this. It was more of like a friendship building, even though the first one was a friendship building. And I just enjoyed the characters more of this book. And it was just a little bit more mysterious. And in a way, I felt more connected, I guess you could say, to this book. Each of these books I read and also watched as a movie, so Stephanie Garber is really great with writing when it comes to that. But because this was a second book in the series instead of the first, if this would have been the first book, it definitely would have been a 5-star, but for whatever reason I rated it 4.5, even though it's my favorite, which is lower than Caraval. Going into my 5-star reads, and also at number 7 we have the final book in the Beautiful Creature series. This is Beautiful Redemption. I was so glad to finally get to this book to wrap it all up, and for whatever reason this book was a little bit different when I read it than the other 3 books. I kind of had bits and pieces that were being portrayed as a movie in my head, but this book in particular, the entire book was a movie. I was reading it, watching it. I don't know what it was about this book, but for whatever reason, I just loved this book so much more. I just felt like it was so much different than the other books, and I had such a better time reading it, so I did rate it 5 stars. I would recommend this series to others. It is YA fantasy, like I said, and I kind of rated it or compared it to, in a way, like the coming of age of Harry Potter, and also because it's a magical system, but not the same. It's definitely not comparable to Harry Potter other than those 2 elements. But I also never knew that there was a movie, and it's here in the back of the book, so maybe eventually I will watch the movie. I think this came out around 2011, so it might be a little bit kind of like Twilight where it's cringy, but overall I love the covers. I actually really enjoyed the series, and I'm so glad I tackled it. I'm so glad I found it in the first place, and this was of course my favorite book of this series. At number 6 we have Nicholas Sparks' The Wish. I really enjoyed this book. I liked how it was kind of dual timeline, I guess you could say. We were following the main character, but we were going back to her relationship, her love interest, and I really liked the story. I guessed a few things correctly, and I also liked the other person she was talking to in like the now timeline. I thought it was so interesting. I like how Nicholas Sparks, when he does dual timelines or even POVs, he somehow connects them. They're all entwined, and I loved when we finally got towards the end and everything started connecting, all the puzzle pieces were being revealed. I think this is such a great recommendation. I love some of Nicholas Sparks' books. I think you can see a few. Some of them fall flat for me, but always I recommend his books to everybody. I feel like they're a great romance without being very descriptive, without being crazy at the same time. Some of them do get crazy as in like the plots, but overall he's a really good author in my opinion. And plus he was like the first author that I really got into. I think I started reading his books in like late middle school, early high school, and actually The Lucky One was the first book I ever read from him, and after that I bought a lot of his books and I would read them pretty much every year or every month. All right, we are at my top 5 books of the year. At number 5, we have All the Light That We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. I love this book. It kind of threw me because it took me a little bit to get into, and then by the end of it, I didn't want it to end. I had so many emotions while reading this book. I love the cover. I love the story. I love the timeline. Historical fiction, of course, during the war. It's a very common plot or storyline, but at the same time, it's so good, especially tugging your heartstrings, and I really enjoyed it. I feel like he did a really good job. I did pick up Cloud Cuckoo Land to see if I like him as an author or if it was just this story in particular. This is my only book that I've read from him, and his writing did take me a hot minute to get into. I don't know if it was just because I was switching books and I really enjoyed the book that I had read before this, or if it's just his writing in particular. But after a while, it got to the point where I was so into the story that I was, instead of reading pretty much like 20 pages per hour, which was very slow for me, I was reading about 50 pages per hour, which is like a normal. And there were so many paths that kept crossing, so many things that kept happening that I just thought was so interesting, so intriguing, and I highly recommend this book. If you have yet to read this, definitely try tackling it in 2025. I don't think you'll regret it at all. At number 4, we have the first book in the Matt Cruz trilogy. We have Airborne. I did originally read this in 2019, so I kind of got a little bit of insight of what this book was going to be, but I reread it this year since I found the second one and the third one, and I still loved it. Just like the last one, I love the adventure. I like when they got stranded on an island. I like the thought process. I loved, for the most part, the characters in this. I had no problems with anybody that you weren't supposed to already like. I didn't have any problems with them. Obviously, the bad guys, you're not supposed to like them. It's YA, fantasy, sci-fi. And of course, if you're gonna add diagrams in books, why not of the best airship that they had, the Aurora? This helped me so much imagine what this world was like, since some things are not real, some things are made up. But honestly, this diagram was so cool to look back on, and I just really enjoyed it. And I think this cover is so amazing. I don't know what it is. I think because it portrays the actual story. All these covers portray the story, but at the same time, this on my shelf, I would display every single book like this if I really wanted to, but I have 2 of them facing with just the spine because they match, and then the Star Climber with the cover. So of course this was in my top 5 books. Are you even surprised I have Skybreaker on here too, which is book 2, the second book? This was actually rated higher. It was still 5 stars, but it was a little bit higher than Airborne, maybe because I read that book previously. This one gave me so much emotion though, so much emotion, in a great way, not like crying emotion. But first we have a diagram. You already know I love this. And then don't worry, we have a second diagram. It's a little bit cut off, but we have a second one, which I'd love to flip back to see how these work, because this was different than what they had currently in the timeline. This was like 40 years earlier, and they had bat wings instead of actual stuff. Then they had made up creatures that were flying around in like 20,000 altitude. And this story in particular, where the last one they got abandoned, this one was a little bit different. I'm not gonna say exactly who, but somebody discovers that this long lost airship that was supposed to be carrying this guy who was insanely rich went missing 40 years ago, and for some reason they ended up stumbling into him. It's this long lost at sea airship, and then of course you have to go get it, bring it back, be the hero, and also get the treasure. That's how it works. But of course some bad things go on, and all of the crew members who once were apparently lost at sea were still on this airship, and because they're so high up, they're frozen because they all died of hypoxia that high up. And it's so interesting to see how it all works, how the story goes, the adventure, the bad guys who happen to come along, the twists and turns, because there's some moments where you might think, oh my gosh, are they actually bad? Are they working for the bad people? Or are they good? Who do we believe? I was so insanely happy. I was so excited. There were moments where they were talking about the crew where I almost felt like, for once, I wasn't necessarily scared, but I was nervous that some of the noises were going to be actual ghosts. Caraval. I talked about the last 2 books, might as well talk about the first book. I had such a vivid movie playing while I was reading this, and this book brought me out of a slump because the months previous to this, like 2 months, I had read 0 books because we moved, we had so much going on, and this really truly brought me out of that, and I really wanted to get back into reading. I really missed reading, and because of that I did rate it 5 stars, and of course it's going to be higher up on my list. Love the cover. Like I already said, I love the magical system of it. I love how Caraval was. I don't think I'll be reading her little novella. She came out for Christmas, I do believe. I definitely want to go into the Broken Hearts trilogy and read that because I loved her writing. This entire series was just so great, so I did of course had to put this so high up on my list. I love how the sun has progressively went down. As we are talking, it is currently dark outside. If you have seen some of my other book videos here on my channel, you might know what book I'm going to hold up for my number 1 book in 2024. I of course have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I absolutely love this. The entire concept of this book was so intriguing, so amazing. I don't know what it was. It definitely pulled at my heart a little bit. It had me so excited to read the next chapter, and honestly in the first 25 pages, maybe 75 pages actually, because I think that's where I soft DNF'd it 2 years ago, I was unsure if I really wanted to read this book, and I pushed through, and it all of a sudden picked up, and I absolutely loved it. It was my favorite book of the year. It was a very great book to introduce me to V.E. Schwab. I absolutely love her writing. I love how she came up with this book, this idea, and I also love the different timelines. We have like 2014 in New York, and then we have in the 1700s when Addie is just a few years old, I think like 7, maybe 13, and then we go through each period of her life because she is cursed. She actually pretty much sells her soul to the devil, or in theory the devil is what I'm gonna say, and because of that she lives a cursed life. She goes through life and nobody remembers who she is. As soon as they shut a door, turn a corner, everything like that, they forget who she is, and some people even think that she is there to harm them, so they get really scared. It has stopped her from living a normal life, like getting an apartment, having a job. It makes it easy to kind of steal stuff, but at the same time she randomly stumbles upon somebody who all of a sudden remembers her after she steals a book, and she tries to play it off because she is just kind of taken aback by, oh my gosh, somebody remembers me, and it becomes this whole big ordeal. It's a big like subplot of romance in a way, and I just really enjoyed it because it was like a dark thing that happened to Addie, and then how I describe it, it's like she all of a sudden has this light of happiness, this ray of happiness just come out, and it just turns really good for a very long time, and it takes you on another adventure, multiple adventures, and you learn more about Addie, you learn more about this other guy, and then of course there's some bad parts, and then we go back to having good parts, and I personally really enjoyed how this book ended. I think it was really great. I highly recommend this book, and definitely don't skip out on it. I think everybody should read it, or at least try to read it. That is my top 15 books of 2024. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you're curious about any book related videos, go ahead and check out my playlist. I have plenty of videos in there from the last couple years to now. My newer ones are definitely my least cringy. I'm not saying they're good, but if you guys are watching this still around Christmas, then Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Hope you all had a blessed holiday, and as always, I hope to see you on another video here on my channel, and God bless.